Okay, folks, so we've now succeeded in making our pretty hideous chart even hideouser. Hideouser and hideouser. And let's do more. No, so we're going to talk now about how we can actually sort of adjust the elements of our web page, make them responsive, make them readable, and basically customize them so that readers are getting the best experience. And really the experience that we want the most for them, that also responds to what devices they're on, or sort of how they're viewing it, right? And I think Joanna's point that she raised last week about thinking not just about what device someone is on, but maybe what context they're in. Obviously, we don't always know that, but certainly, as we pointed out, right, things like thinking about interaction patterns, you can't expect people to be clicking on tiny things or certainly rolling over anything if they're viewing your graphic on a mobile device, for example. So it is important to be thoughtful about these choices, and there are kind of two different ways that we can design our pages to customize the experience and optimize the experience depending on how it's being viewed. And so we're going to look at both of those ways today, both of which are supported by a cascading style sheets library known as Bootstrap. I think I mentioned Bootstrap was developed by Twitter. It has become extremely popular. You will very quickly start to recognize where Bootstrap is used around the web. They have this sort of gallery of options here. And we can go ahead and download our own copy of this, but I am actually just going to go to, I'm going to go straight to the CSS, which is, it has some JavaScript elements, etc. available, but we're going to just look at using what we call a hosted version of the library. So the same way that we have our, the same way that we have here these links that actually point to Google, and that's how we're loading the library for Google visualizations, we're going to get a link that points to a website that's hosting a copy of the Bootstrap code, so we don't have to kind of like download our own copy of it. And we'll talk in class about reasons why you might want to take one or the other approach. For simplicity's sake, we're just going to include it the way we included our JavaScript before. So first I have to find the link to it somewhere. So here we go. So under getting started, it's a Bootstrap CDN. So we're actually going to take two pieces of this. We're going to take just the style sheet, so minified CSS, and something called the optional theme. And basically the theme is what does things like provide nice looking buttons by default and things like that. So again, this is something that I take. I'm just going to paste it into the head of my document, right? So right here. Okay. And again, it sort of comes pre-commented for us, which is nice. And this isn't going to make anything happen magically, it just makes available things to us. So we're going to, again, take a similar approach as we did with the Google visualization library, and we're going to look for some examples to kind of get a feel for some code examples on this, on the Bootstrap site, so that we can kind of start to get a feel for what's possible. So I am going to go to CSS. And there's all kinds of things. Now, one important element, and we talked about this in class actually, was that they sort of talked about the idea of the grid system. So we looked at things like the New York Times and WSJ.com, right? And we noted that there was, I think there was also mention of the Bloomberg redesign, which was more or less popular. A long time to slow. Right, so we talked about how there's actually a grid here, and we can sort of see pieces of it showing up where if you imagine this page divided into, say, 12 columns, we can kind of eyeball and say, like, maybe this is like 2, 4, 2, 2. That doesn't really add up. This could be, I don't know, maybe it's like, what does that up? 3, 3. It's not 3, 3, and 3. 2, 2, 2. I don't know. Anyway, you get the idea, though, is that basically, there's kind of this alignment thing that happens. So here's the Bloomberg redesign. This is very obviously a grid system, right? We can actually see the grid really clearly here. So here we have 6 segments. So this is probably a 12-column grid. This would be 6 2s, and then we have a 6, 6 and 6. Within the 6, this is a 3 and a 3, right? So we see how this works. So Bootstrap works on this exact same principle. Every container is part of a 12-column, is sort of subdivided by Bootstrap. It looks for 12 columns, right? So basically what that means is that any given quote-unquote row of content, like for example this row of content, we need to make sure that we provide it with 12, that we describe 12 columns worth of content. It's a little abstract now, so again, let's look at an example that really ought to help. So let's go to inside, skip media queries for now. So let's just take a look at this example, right? So stacked to horizontal, this is a very common approach, and I apologize that some of these examples are going to be a little hard to see in the demo here. Go ahead and make sure you go to this website and take a look. But as I scale the page, things start to happen, like things that have been defined as one column start to stack on top of each other, right? And or collapse. So something that was 8 and 4, so two items that at a larger size appear next to each other, 8 and 4, 4, 4, 4. As you collapse down, seeing them on a smaller screen, well, they actually become the same size, right? And then kind of everything is single width. So that's one way to do it. So what we're going to do is just take an example. We can just copy this code. Now, the first thing we have to do is create a div, a container fluid div. Okay, so this is just a what's the word I'm looking for? Convention. It's a convention imposed by Bootstrap. And so I'm going to say, okay, look, here's my main container, right? I have created a div container. Oops, looks like that was left over from something, but there we go, div. Okay, and inside of that div, okay, so that is going to be the entire box of my web page, right? That is everything here, and this could be a little bit taller, right? So it's all of this, and obviously here is my visualization. Inside of that, I'm going to say 2 rows of content. So one div is going to be class row, and I'm going to say that, so I want to make sure I get my visualization inside of this, okay? And I can have both an ID and a class on something. So ID is chart div, and the chart div ID is being used by our scripts.js over here. Okay, it's saying go get the div, go get the element that has the ID of chart div, and that's where we're telling the Google Visualization Library to put our visualization, right? We said, look, go find that thing, and then take all the stuff you made and put it inside that, which is why it shows up there. However, I can have both IDs and classes, so I can say class equals, and now again, this is the convention of Bootstrap. I'm going to say call MD 12. And actually, I can put more than one class on a given thing. But basically, all this is going to say is, you know, when it's a medium-sized screen, I want this div to occupy all 12 columns, right? So basically, it's going to be the full width of the screen. This isn't going to change anything at this point because, well, it was pretty much doing that already. However, this does give us the opportunity to create another row. So here I have one row div. I'm going to say, okay, and again, I want to comment here. I'm going to say, you know, this is the row with my chart. And say div class, and I'm going to create another row because, you know, if we think of it sort of like a table, then there's another row. So then I'm going to say, okay, this is a row with my responsive content. Okay. So in here, I'm going to go back to this example. So you can see they actually have the div class row here. So I can actually, I'm just going to take what's inside that. Oh, they've got lots of rows here. Okay, sorry, they've got many rows. I guess I should have known that. Okay, so I'm going to take all of this. So I'm going to say these are the rows with my responsive content. And here we are I've pasted that in, and if I take a reload on the page, I should see. Now, it's not very exciting to look at right now, but I just want to point out that as I do scale this page, there we go. See how it went from all filling out and then now it's stacking up? So this is one way that we can manage it. You can imagine that this is very handy when we're looking at things like small multiples. And we want to have things kind of layered across one row, but if someone is looking at it on a smaller screen or a smaller window, on mobile, of course, that it stacks really nicely and kind of flows down. So again, the content in here is like not super demonstrative, but it does start to give you an idea of what's possible, and frankly, how simple it is to create responsive content using this Bootstrap framework. So the thing that I want to point out about this is that in every single one of these rows, right, we have a div with a class row, and then inside it we have divs, and the number of digits, right, inside each one always has to add up to 12. And I can make rows within rows, but inside a given row div, I always have to have an assortment of classes that lead up to 12. So here it's 8 and 4, 4, 4 and 4, 6 and 6, etc., right? And the default thing there is going to be that if you say, look, this takes up one column at medium size, it's going to start to collapse when you get to a small size. It won't expand any further when it gets to a large size because we haven't told it to behave differently. But basically, this is how we can start to put pieces of content into a page in a way that is both well-aligned and appealing and attractive and responsive. So those are the basics on that. Creating responsive content is just one way that we can handle visualizing for people on different devices. The other thing that we can do is we can actually say we want you to show different content depending, like completely different content, depending on the size of the device. And we saw that in the example that Joanna showed last week, where you got, I think in that case they were actually doing it based on what type of device you have, like whether it was an iPhone or an Android. But we can also do things that basically say, look, if somebody's on a small screen, show this content as opposed to that content. So again, that's going to be really helpful when you're looking at things like, say you have an interactive version of something that you want people to see when they look at it on a desktop, but it doesn't make sense for them to try to do rollovers or click on small objects on the mobile. You can actually just show a different version of the visualization. So we'll come back in a few minutes and look at how that's done also with Bootstrap.